Imagine for a moment stepping into the shoes of those who came before us. Welcome to a journey that transforms history into vibrant stories that captivate and inspire. You're walking through the muddy lanes of a medieval village, the early morning mist clinging to thatched rooftops, the air thick with wood smoke dung and a faint tang of rot. Somewhere nearby, a rooster crows. A child sneezes once, then twice, and an old woman crosses herself hurriedly. You freeze, because in this time and place, a sneeze could be a prelude to something much, much worse. You see, if you're feeling under the weather in the Middle Ages, you probably won't survive it. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're here, post your location and local time in the comments. I'd love to see where everyone's listening from. Wherever you are, I hope tonight brings you rest, comfort, and maybe a curious dream or two. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're shivering though the sun hasn't yet risen. You slept on a straw-stuffed mattress, if you can call it that, shared with your siblings, all of whom are coughing this morning. There's no such thing as central heating, and the only warmth comes from the embers of last night's fire, assuming they haven't gone out entirely. You feel it already, that telltale scratch in the back of your throat. And just like that, you know it's begun. You drag yourself from your bed, or more accurately, your pile of straw and lice, and stumble toward the door, passing your mother hunched over a pot of watery porridge. She doesn't say anything. Her lips are chapped, and her face is pale. She's been sick, too. Everyone's been sick. It's just the way of things, but this time feels worse. You don't know the name of the illness that's arrived, only that it brings a sudden fever, dark swellings near the armpits, and death within a week. You've seen the black sores before? You've watched neighbors turn purple. You've seen the cart go by? The one with the bell and the man shouting, "Bring out your dead." But it's not just the plague that haunts you. Sickness comes in many flavors. There's the sweating sickness which drowns people in their own panic, the ague which chills you to the bone, or the bloody flux. Let's not even talk about the bloody flux. You wander outside into the pale morning light. A dog barks in the distance. The baker's boy is already limping, one eye swollen shut. Someone says he got it from drinking river water, which you had yesterday. You take a mental note to panic about that later. The thing is, no one understands disease the way we do today. There are no germ theories, no bacteria, no knowledge of viruses. Instead, illness is explained by imbalances, your humors of which there are four: blood phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Catch a cold, too much phlegm, diarrhea, bad yellow bile, coughing blood. All four probably, and your odds are not looking good. Some people say disease is a punishment from God. Others say it's in the air miasmas. They call them the bad smells. And when someone dies, the clothes they wore might be burned, or worse, passed on to someone else, because cloth is expensive and people are poor. You remember the last time someone got sick in your household? It started with a mild cough. Then came the sweats, the babbling, the shaking, and finally the stillness. Your uncle. You don't talk about him much anymore. The priest said he was taken for his sins, though what those were no one says. You move through your village slowly, aware that almost anything you touch door handles wooden spoons. Even the cat might be plotting your demise. The cat, by the way, is fat and aloof, and according to your grandmother, probably a witch's spy. You'd laugh, but you're too tired to. A friend once told you about the city, how in London, when the sickness came, they would paint a red cross on your door. That meant, don't come in. Everyone in here is dying. Not that anyone could do much anyway. There were no hospitals, just monasteries, and sometimes not even those. You remember your cousin being carted off to the local priory with a fever. You never saw him again. The midwife in your town, Agnes, is said to have healing hands. She gives people herbs, sometimes even prayers. Once she even boiled a frog and used the broth on a burn. No one knows if that worked, but the burn didn't kill the boy, so maybe that's something. People whisper that Agnes might be a witch, but they whisper it quietly. Because sometimes Agnes is the only one standing between you and a coffin. You arrive at the village green. There's a pile of dead birds. Someone claims they carry sickness in their beaks. Another says it's a sign the harvest will fail. Everyone agrees that something is wrong. The air feels thick, too still, too quiet. And then just like that, a man starts convulsing near the well. People shout. Some scatter. A few run to get Father Oswin. No one touches him, not anymore. Not since the last one who tried collapsed the next day. You back away, slowly, carefully. You hold your breath like it might protect you. It won't, but the illusion is comforting. You've seen whole households vanish in a week. The bodies burned or buried in shallow pits. The rats come afterward. At night you lie awake and listen to the coughing. Not yours this time, but your sister's. It echoes off the walls like a grim lullaby. You wonder if she'll wake up. You wonder if you will. Historians still argue whether the high mortality rates were caused more by the diseases themselves or the utter lack of sanitation, nutrition, and medical understanding. You lean toward all of the above. One fringe theory you've heard suggests the rise of cats was actually a health improvement, because fewer rats meant fewer fleas, and fewer fleas meant less plague. But of course, during certain periods, the church called cats unholy, which led to their extermination, which led to, you guessed it, more rats. It's funny in a bleak sort of way. The things that might save you are the ones most likely to be burned, drowned, or accused of devilry. And the things that kill you, they wear long robes and speak Latin. You fall asleep to the sound of distant chanting. The monks are singing for the dead again. You wake to a sour smell, part smoke, part sweat, and something else, something vaguely like spoiled cabbage. That's the scent of sickness clinging to everything in your home. Not that you know what causes it, only that it hangs around when someone is unwell, which is often. You sit up slowly, your muscles aching, your thoughts heavy. The scratch in your throat has evolved into something more assertive overnight. Your mouth tastes like metal and old bread. You reach for a rag and press it to your forehead. It's damp with yesterday's sweat. You haven't the energy to fetch clean water. And anyway, what is clean in a place where everyone uses the same buckets and the same hands that just finished mucking the pigs? You look around the room. No books, no charts, no helpful pamphlets about how to stay healthy. Not even a good superstition to lean on this time. Because here's the thing, no one knows what a germ is. You've never even heard the word. Microbes, bacteria. Microscopic organisms that enter the body and multiply. That's sorcery talk or future talk, to be precise. Instead, people around you speak of bad air and imbalance, of humors and sin, of corrupted blood and angry saints, of curses. If your nose runs, it's not because of a virus. It's because your body is expelling excess phlegm to rebalance your internal essence. Logical in its own 14th century way. You shuffle outside to find someone has hung a bunch of herbs over your doorway, probably rosemary tied with a red thread. A neighbor's gift. It's meant to ward off the evil humors. You sniff it. Smells vaguely like hope and mildew. There's no sense in blaming people for their ignorance. They're doing the best they can. You have to remember, nobody has seen a germ. Microscopes won't exist for centuries. The closest most people get to understanding disease is looking at pus and guessing. In towns, rich folks burn bundles of fragrant herbs in the streets, lavender sage thyme. They believe nice smells chase away bad ones and with them illness. It's called fumigation, and it doesn't work, but it certainly improves the vibe. You pass a group of children poking at a rat with a stick. One of them is wearing a dried orange peel tied around his neck. That's another form of protection. Citric armor, if you will. You admire the creativity. People with money sometimes wear little pouches filled with crushed rose petals, ambergris, or even dried lizard skins. These are pomanders. They're the medieval equivalent of essential oil diffusers without the diffusing or the science. But no one truly understands what causes illness. Some blame the alignment of planets. Others think it's divine punishment, which makes sneezing in church especially awkward. One fringe theory that's made the rounds lately is that earthquakes release poisonous vapors from the ground. So if you catch the flu, perhaps it's tectonic. Still, you don't question it. You can't. There's no other framework, just faith, fear, and trial by error. Mostly error. Your neighbor Edwin the baker swears by pigeon blood. If you have a fever, he says it helps to press a freshly slaughtered pigeon to your chest. The warmth, the smell, the effect. It's never worked, of course. But he's still alive and in medieval logic that makes him right. Another man once claimed eating crushed emerald powder cured his stomach ache. Historians still argue whether he recovered or just glittered to death. The concept of contagiousness exists in a hazy way. People do notice that illness travels from house to house, ship to ship, monastery to monastery. But they often misattribute it. They think sin is the carrier, or envy, or maybe a glance from someone with the evil eye. And when you're sick, people pull away, not always out of fear of infection, but because they think your soul might be under judgment, and they don't want guilt by association. That said, there are some proto-scientific thinkers. If you live in a city, maybe you've heard of Ibn Sina Avicenna, whose canon of medicine still circulates in Latin translation. It's full of observations on symptoms, diagnoses, and anatomy. But unless you're rich and literate, that book may as well be a myth. More accessible to your world are the local healers who mix theology with folk magic. One popular cure for fever involves placing a toad in a sock and tying it around your neck. Another recommends wearing a dead mole in your bodice. You're not sure how either of these came into fashion, but you suspect someone had a flair for dramatic accessories. As for your current symptoms, you're told to chew fennel and pray. If the praying doesn't help, try mustard seed and wine. If that fails, perhaps your illness is due to demons, in which case a priest might chant Latin at your feet while a nun sprinkles holy water on your forehead. Some physicians advise against bathing, believing water opens your skin to bad humors. So if you're sick, you stay unwashed. If you're not sick, you stay unwashed just in case. Honestly, you'd be forgiven for wondering if being smelly is the point. There's a growing belief among scholars of your time that bad smells themselves are the cause of disease. This miasma theory, popular in both Europe and parts of the Islamic world, contends that foul odors carry poisonous particles. This explains why people burn incense during plagues, why they avoid graveyards, and why public latrines are seen as hazardous, although not enough to actually clean them. That would be madness. You sit now by a small fire wrapped in a thin blanket, sipping a brew of chamomile and crushed cloves. It tastes awful, but feels soothing. Your grandmother prepared it. She said it was given to her by her mother, who got it from an old woman who used to live in the forest, or maybe a goose. The story got muddled. You stare into the flames. It's oddly comforting, this crackling orange glow. Outside you hear coughing, so much coughing, and the clang of a blacksmith who still insists on working through his wheezing. Life goes on after all. Sickness or no, your joints ache. Your breath rattles. But you find yourself amused at a story you once heard, that some medieval towns banned tomatoes because there was considered evil fruit from the New World. You're not sure how that connects to your illness, but somehow it feels related. Like everything dangerous must be foreign. You lie back and close your eyes. You imagine a world where doctors wear clean robes, where they understand bacteria, and no one prescribes leeches because they think you have too much blood. Someday, perhaps. But for now, you just listen to your body falling apart in slow, poetic, entirely preventable ways. There's a knock at your door. Not the polite kind, but the firm, impatient rap of someone who thinks they're important, or at least wants you to think so. You pull your thin blanket tighter around your shoulders and shuffle over each step a dull ache. When you crack open the wooden door, you find him standing there, your town's barber surgeon. He's got a leather pouch slung across his shoulder stained with things you'd rather not examine too closely. His fingernails are blackened. His breath smells of onions and ale. And he grins like someone who just found a new boil to lance. Barber surgeon's the unholy multi-tool of medieval medicine. He's the one you see if you need a tooth yanked, a cyst drained, or a haircut sharp enough to make the lice retreat. The man has a blade for every occasion, and the enthusiasm of someone who definitely didn't go to medical school, because, well, that's not really a thing yet. You step aside grudgingly. He doesn't wait for an invitation. He just tramps in unbothered by your cough or the fact that your house smells like boiled herbs and sadness. He sets his tools on the table, wooden bowls curved, knives a worn strap of leather for tourniquets, and, oh yes, the leech jar. Open wide, he says cheerfully, poking at your gums with the pick that looks like it was recently used on a horseshoe. You wince, he tuts. Bad humor in the jaw. Could be worse. Let's bleed you a bit and see if it improves. Because naturally, if you're sick, you must have too much blood. That's how it works. You're like a wineskin that needs decanting. He slices the inside of your arm with a swift motion and places a small, rough bowl underneath. You watch the blood pool and feel a strange relief as if pain and treatment have become the same thing. Your head swims. You're not sure if it's the blood loss or the absurdity. Barber surgeons didn't just cut. They also set bone-stitched wounds and occasionally performed amputations using nothing more than a saw or rag to bite, and a prayer you didn't wake up halfway through. One even claimed to remove a bladder stone using only a butter knife and divine inspiration. Historians still argue whether that's heroic or horrifying. In theory, there were actual doctors, physicians, as they preferred to be called. Educated men often trained at one of the great universities like Paris or Bologna, but unless you're rich, titled, or a monk, you'll never meet one. Physicians write in Latin. They don't touch wounds, that's for the barbers. Your village has none of those Latin-speaking elites. You have the man currently wrapping your arm in something that looks suspiciously like a reused sock. He hums as he works, satisfied with the quantity of blood you've relinquished. To draw the sickness out, he explains as if it's a demon hiding in your veins. You nod mostly to make him leave. He rummages in his bag and pulls out a paste made from goose fat and mashed garlic. He slathers it across your chest like he's buttering a particularly uncooperative loaf of bread. It smells like desperation and lunch. You try not to gag. His final flourish, a boiled rag wrapped around your head with a hole left for your nose so the illness can escape. Then he gives your cheek a pat as if you've just completed a spa treatment and departs in search of his next lucky client. Left alone, you lie back down, dizzy and oozing. You ponder the barber's diagnosis: thick blood, stagnant humors, swelling in the liver. None of it makes sense, but then again, nothing about this era's medicine does. The more you learn, the less reassuring it all becomes. There was a time, just a generation ago, when people thought that redheads were more susceptible to fevers because of hot blood. They even tried painting eyebrows black to absorb bad air. One local lord insisted on sleeping with frogs under his pillow. Another wore a necklace of dried beetles. One fringe treatment whispered about in the hills involved lying naked under a full moon while reciting psalms backward. They said it worked if you believed hard enough, and if it didn't, well, you were probably too sinful to be healed anyway. Medicine was as much theater as science, more so perhaps. Some barbers even performed in town squares, showing off their surgical skills with pigs or convicted criminals, often simultaneously. See how the man bleeds. Now buy some of my wife's cough syrup. It's healing and marketing in one very sticky package. You try to distract yourself by thinking of something cheerful. Once you heard that eating a spoonful of honey each morning could keep the plague away. You don't have honey, but you like the idea. It's sweet. Another tale: in a distant city, a man covered his entire body in melted wax to seal in his good health. He was later found stuck to a wooden bench. You're slipping now into that hazy, fever dream space where nothing makes sense and every shadow looks like a monk or a rat. You hear the wind rattle the shutters. The fire's nearly out. You recall your aunt once saying, "If the barber bleeds you and you feel better, it's God's grace. If you die, it was your time." Convenient logic, no refunds. And yet somehow people endure. They adapt. They swap treatments like recipes, chasing the tiniest edge against a world that seems determined to snuff them out before 30. You're still alive. For now. But you've got garlic on your chest, blood on your arm, and a rising sense that the man with the blades wasn't even the strangest part of your day. You wake in the middle of the night, dizzy and damp, with the distinct feeling that something inside you has shifted out of place. It's the kind of feeling that might be indigestion or divine punishment. Hard to say. Either way, your arm aches from the barber surgeon's cheerful assault earlier, and your chest still smells vaguely of poultry seasoning. The air is thick and unmoving. The fire has burned itself into a pile of gray regret. You sit up slowly, sweating through your linen shirt. The fever is worse now. That's not a guess, it's written in the rivulets trickling down your spine and the distant drumming in your ears. You remember what comes next. The bloodletting didn't work. Time for leeches. Leeches are considered high-end medicine in your world. Classy, cultured, sophisticated in the way only slimy vampiric pondworms can be. You retrieve the clay jar from the corner. It's your own jar, though you have no idea where the leeches came from. Someone gave them to your grandmother after she helped deliver a neighbor's baby in exchange for 2 chickens and a wooden spoon. You peer inside. One of them wriggles. You name him Marcus. The others look sluggish. Perhaps they've already dined on your cousin last week. Reusing leeches isn't exactly recommended, but when you live in a world where sugar is considered a miracle cure and mercury is occasionally spooned into sick children, you take what you can get. You steel yourself and press one of the writhing creatures onto your inner thigh. The skin tightens, there's a twitch, then a small wet pop as it latches on. You wince, feeling oddly violated. Leeches were once believed to balance the humors, especially in cases of inflammation. Red, angry boils. Let a leech suck the heat out. Swollen joints apply generously. Did your friend faint for no reason? That's probably too much blood. Again, get a jar. You lie back, trying not to imagine Marcus enjoying himself. He swells slowly. It's not subtle. You've seen pigs eat with more discretion. Meanwhile, in more affluent circles, the bloodletting method is elevated to an art form. Physicians will calculate the optimal vein to drain based on your star sign, your temperament, sanguine, choleric, melancholic, or phlegmatic, and whether Mars is rising. Astrology plays a disturbingly strong role in medieval medicine. Your brother was once denied treatment for a toothache because the moon was in Scorpio. Another man claimed his leg fell off because Venus was jealous of his mistress. Historians still argue whether these beliefs slowed or merely distracted actual medical progress. Leeches weren't the only remedy, of course. When bleeding didn't work or worked too well, people turned to the poultice. Imagine a thick paste of mashed onions, vinegar, barley flour, sheep's dung, and occasionally wine. Apply it directly to the swelling. Don't ask where the dung came from. There were also purgatives, things that made you vomit violently, and laxatives because, heaven forbid, your bowels contain an unbalanced mood. A popular cure for sore throats involved roasted fig compresses. Another recommended boiling a hedgehog, grinding the remains into a powder, and mixing it with honey. The hedgehog didn't appreciate it. One fringe remedy involved burying a dead toad under your floorboards to draw illness away. If the toad liquefied within 3 days, the patient would live. If not, dig deeper. You shift uncomfortably. Marcus is full now, and let's go with a lazy, burp-like slurp. You gently pluck him off and drop him into the jar. He deserves a nap. There's blood everywhere. Not the kind that gushes or spurts, more like the gentle weeping of a wound that just can't commit. You wrap your thigh and settle back, wondering if your humors feel more balanced yet. You think of St. Cuthbert, who was said to heal fevers with his breath. Or was it St. Hildegard who wrote about fiery phlegm and prescribed crushed pearls for headaches? You lose track. The saints blur together in fever dreams and miracle stories. Some doctors of the era genuinely believed the heart moved the body's vital spirits through invisible channels called pneuma. This theory held up about as well as the herbal poultices, meaning sometimes sort of in rare cases, not really. You remember reading once, or maybe hearing about a man who cured his persistent nosebleeds by walking backward through a pigsty while reciting the Lord's Prayer in reverse. Whether the bleeding stopped or he simply lost the will to continue is unclear. And yet here you are, still breathing, still feverish, still not entirely sure whether any of this works. But it gives people hope. You shuffle outside for air. The stars are out crisp and distant like holes in the heavens. The village is quiet except for the faint moan of someone across the green. You wonder if they're using frogs tonight or maybe trying the mustard plaster method again. Somewhere a dog howls. A moment later another answers. Old Agnes, the village healer, always said that dogs could smell death before it arrived. You briefly consider barking back just to throw them off. You sit on the steps and hug your knees, feeling the breeze against your damp skin. It's cool and clear, and for a moment you feel human again. Not a patient, not a specimen. Just a person watching the stars. And that's when you hear the familiar clink of metal and the soft jingle of the barber's tools. He's making another late-night visit. You hope it's not to you. You quietly slip back inside and bar the door. There's only so much healing you can handle in one day. The church bells ring out at dawn, not to call people to prayer, but to signal another death. You pull your thin blanket over your head and groan. It's too early for religion, but in your world, the church doesn't wait for convenience. It waits for no one, in fact, least of all the dying. Still feverish, you force yourself upright. Your arm still throbs from the barber's handiwork. A faint purplish ring remains where Marcus the leech did his work. You whisper a small apology to your leg for subjecting it to medieval medicine. Then slowly you get up and shuffle to the door. The morning air is cool and damp, tinged with smoke and incense. A funeral procession is already moving through the village square. The priest leads it, Father Oswin, whose robes smell of candle wax and old wool. His face is lined with both wisdom and a chronic lack of sleep. He swings his censer, slowly letting the bitter fragrance of burning myrrh snake into the air. Not just for solemnity, mind you, people believe the incense helps drive away the bad smells, which, as we've established, are thought to be the real culprits behind illness. Behind him, four men carry the body on a wooden plank. No coffin, just a cloth. Coffins are for the wealthy, and even they've been reusing them lately. A practical economy lowered the dead in the box, tip them out, and save the wood for the next soul. Recycle medieval style. The body doesn't get much attention. That's because in this village, death is as routine as bread baking or sheep shearing. The real focus is what happens next, because now that someone has died, the church has arrived to serve its official medicinal role. Monasteries, after all, are the closest thing to hospitals you have. Not because monks are particularly good at healing, but because they're literate and quiet, and they own buildings with empty beds. The care is simple broth. Prayers, maybe a bit of wine if you're lucky. No surgeries here, no experiments, just clean sheets, well cleaner, and the faint hope that God still accepts bribes. You once spent 3 days in a monastery after a fever. They gave you holy water. You drank it dutifully, though it tasted a bit like stale copper. A monk prayed over you and dabbed your forehead with oil, blessed by someone very important in a cathedral very far away. You remember thinking the oil might have been more useful as soup. The religious philosophy of illness is hard to escape. You've grown up hearing that sickness is punishment, that your suffering might be purifying your soul, burning off your sins like a fire consumes dry straw. Comforting in a twisted way, but dangerous too. Because if illness is a divine test, then trying too hard to cure it might be resisting God's will. Some believe saints can intercede. Saint Sebastian is the go-to for plague, probably because he was shot full of arrows and lived briefly. Others carry tiny relics, a splinter from across a toe bone from a long-dead bishop. Or in one woman's case, a suspiciously finger-like stick she claimed belonged to St. Cuthbert's donkey. You watch as a woman kneels outside the chapel clutching a wax figurine shaped like a child. It's a votive offering meant to symbolize her son who's coughing somewhere nearby. She lights a candle and prays hard and fast like she's trying to beat death to the finish line. Inside the church, it's dim and hushed. A few wooden benches. Stone floors slick with damp. A crucifix above the altar looms large and splintery. You kneel beside a few others more out of habit than hope. The priest says a prayer for the dead and for the sick, which includes nearly everyone. As he speaks, you glance up at the painted ceiling. Faded images of saints stare down, eyes wide and unsettling. One of them seems to be holding a jar of something, maybe ointment, maybe entrails. It's hard to tell. Medieval art isn't big on clarity, and then the sermon begins. It's less about healing, more about preparing to die well. Because even when the church offers medicine, its real power is in managing souls. Birth-death confession, it's the spiritual equivalent of a healthcare plan minus the dental. Your mind drifts. You think about the monks you once saw grinding herbs in the cloister garden. They tended calendula, rosemary, sage. Some of them knew enough about plant medicine to be helpful lavender for sleep, garlic for infections. Others believed that applying mashed snails to the forehead could reduce swelling. Historians still argue whether those monks were pioneers or just very bored. There were also healing masses, special services where the sick were gathered and prayed over collectively. Sometimes these were followed by group purges, which is as unpleasant as it sounds. Imagine 60 villagers all vomiting in chorus. Divine harmony at its worst. One fringe practice involved hanging a piece of bread from the neck of a dying person, letting it absorb the death vapors, and then burying the bread to prevent it from escaping. You once saw a baker throw out an entire batch after learning someone had done that next door. Superstition, hygiene, or both doesn't matter. The bread was never touched. Eventually, you stand and step outside. The sun is higher now. Children are playing quietly but playing. Life, stubborn and persistent, goes on. You pass a wooden cross driven into the ground beside a house. A sign someone inside has died or soon will. It's both a warning and a prayer. You take the long way home, past the stream, past the mill where someone's laid out herbs to dry. There's a donkey wearing a crown of garlic. You nod respectfully. The donkey does not return the gesture. Back home, your fever has ebbed. For now, but you know it'll return. Like the church, like the bell, like the scent of incense and onion breath. Your world has no cures, only rituals. And somehow that's enough. You lie back down listening to the soft creak of the roof beams, the distant mumble of monks. You think of wax saints' oily prayers and the absurd sacred theater of trying not to die. There's something haunting about the stillness of a sick room. The fire crackles low. A pot simmers on the hearth, its contents indecipherable, maybe onion, maybe turnip, maybe regret. Shadows stretch across the walls as you lie half awake, half dreaming, and fully miserable. Your head is pounding. You're hot and cold at once, like your body hasn't decided what season it is. You hear footsteps, soft, familiar, and slightly uneven. Your mother. She enters the room carrying a small bowl and a bundle of dried herbs tied together with a threadbare ribbon. You open your mouth to speak, but your tongue feels like someone's packed it in wool. She says nothing, just sits beside you on the edge of the bed, dips a rag in the bowl, and begins wiping your forehead. It's cool, smells faintly of chamomile and old apples. The scent alone almost makes you believe it might help. You watch her work quietly, efficiently. She's done this before. Many, many times. For her own mother, for your uncle, for the neighbor's boy who died after eating some suspicious berries. She even helped a traveler once, patched his broken leg with splints made from broom handles and kept him alive on barley porridge. Your home isn't a hospital. But then again, most medieval hospitals aren't really hospitals either. You know what real care looks like. It's this smoky, cramped, warm, and human. She places the herb bundle beneath your pillow. You don't ask what's in it. You already know lavender, rosemary, dried mint, maybe a few rose petals from the chapel garden. Things that are supposed to sweeten the air. Whether it purifies your lungs or just makes your deathbed smell less sad is unclear. The idea of purifying isn't just superstition, it's strategy. The house is filled with smoke most days, not just from cooking, but from smoldering bundles of herbs hung near the rafters. Thyme, sage, even dried orange peels if you can get them. Some believe the smoke drives out sickness. Others think it masks the smell of dying. Either way, no one complains. She hands you a warm cup, some kind of thin broth. You sip it slowly. It tastes mostly of water and a hint of garlic. No salt. Salt is precious. This is a poor man's medicine, hydration, and heat. She wraps you in a second blanket, the one with the itchy edges. The scratchiness is almost comforting. It means you're still alive enough to feel discomfort. At your feet, a small bowl of vinegar water steams gently. The idea is that the rising scent might help clear your lungs or at least make the room feel like something's being done. You half expect a monk to appear and start muttering Latin over it. You drift in and out of sleep. You dream of gardens of sun-drenched cloisters, of a giant cabbage offering you a miracle cure in exchange for your soul. You refuse. The cabbage sighs and withers. You wake with a start. It's night again. Or maybe it's just the fire has gone out. Either way, the room is dark and colder than before. Your mother's not there now, probably fetching more water or herbs or whispering prayers in the corner. She talks to saints under her breath: Saint Apollonia for toothaches, Saint Roch for plague, Saint Vitus for fevers and awkward twitching. Some say Saint Vitus can dance a fever right out of you. There was once an entire village that started dancing uncontrollably. Some blamed demons. Others said it was mass hysteria. Historians still argue whether it was illness poisoning or an elaborate excuse to skip work. In your half-dream state, you imagine joining them, dancing feverishly, your sweat flying, your limbs flailing in rhythm with a chorus of coughing and tambourines. It's either terrifying or oddly fun. When you wake again, your sister is beside you holding a tattered book with faded ink and a bent spine. She's not reading it, she can't, but she turns the pages slowly, pretending. The book is filled with herbal remedies, folk wisdom, and prayers. A gift from a traveling peddler who once passed through and traded it for 3 eggs and a promise. One page has an illustration of a man with a very large head and steam coming out of his ears. The caption in shaky Latin suggests treating this with cabbage leaves and penance. Another page offers a charm against nosebleeds. Tie a red ribbon around the big toe and spit 3 times toward the sunrise. You tried it once. It worked, though you weren't actually bleeding at the time. The room is full of makeshift cures. Crushed mint to chew, a strip of flannel soaked in camphor oil, an egg with your name scratched onto the shell sitting on the windowsill to catch the illness as it leaves your body. You don't question it, you're too tired to. Besides, everyone knows someone who swears by it. One woman in the next village over kept a bundle of dried mouse skin in her larder, as a charm against gut evil. She lived to 92. People took notes. Your family's tried everything short of hiring a magician. Though, to be fair, even that wouldn't be unusual. Some villages have cunning folk, part herbalist, part priest, part con artist, who claim to heal by drawing illness into eggs, rocks, or even shoes. You once watched a woman shout at a pile of potatoes until her cough went away. Coincidence, probably. Still, she kept shouting at root vegetables for years afterward. The fire has been relit. You're too warm now. You kick off the itchy blanket and turn on your side facing the hearth. Your dog curls at your feet. He's not exactly a comfort animal. He smells like pond water and old bread, but he's warm and he's loyal. And he doesn't judge your fever hallucinations. Tomorrow you're told someone will come by with the special remedy, a syrup made from honey nettles and elderflower boiled 3 times under the full moon and stirred with a silver spoon. Not because it helps, because it must help. Hope is the most important ingredient, and you still have that, for now. The morning sun slices through the wooden slats of your wall like golden spears dust dancing lazily in the beams. You open your eyes, slowly blinking away the crust that's glued your lashes together. Your throat still burns. Your muscles still ache, but at least you're not dead, which by local standards is basically a clean bill of health. Someone's at the table. The clink of wooden jars and the soft mumble of an old voice gives it away. Agnes. Agnes is not your grandmother, but she might as well be. She's older than moss, her hands are permanently stained green, and she smells faintly of onions and secrets. Most people in your village don't remember a time before Agnes. There are whispers she delivered half the villagers and cursed the other half into staying alive. She sits hunched over your table, grinding something in a pestle that looks like it was carved from the thigh bone of a saint, though more likely it's just wood. You clear your throat, a dry rasp that sounds like you've been swallowing gravel. She looks up. One eyebrow rises. "Still breathing, are we?" She mutters not unkindly. She stands, walks over, and places a bowl beside your bed. The mixture inside is thick and gray, smelling strongly of mint vinegar, and something you can't quite place. probably moss or something that used to be moss. She tells you to sip. You obey. It tastes like regret and moldy tea, but you get it down. She nods once satisfied, then pulls a small leather pouch from her cloak and starts laying out ingredients. Crushed juniper berries, dried yarrow, slivers of something that might be root or very old cheese. Apothecaries in cities might scoff at Agnes. They wear neat robes, weigh powders with tiny brass scales, and stock shelves with exotic ingredients like cinnamon alum or powdered pearl. Agnes has none of that. She has weeds, but she knows which weeds make you sleep, which ones ease your lungs, and which ones send a grown man to the privy for a week. You once saw her chase off a fever by placing a damp cloth soaked in foxglove over a man's chest. It worked, or he got better on his own. Historians still argue whether medieval cures were genuinely medicinal or just statistically lucky. You try to thank her, but she waves the words away. She's already muttering a charm under her breath, something about iron teeth and warding off the night wind. You catch every third word. It's half prayer, half curse, and entirely comforting in its absurdity. As she works, you ask her between coughs if she learned all this from her mother. She nods, still sorting herbs, and she from hers, and so on. She shrugs, till the first one who figured nettles made the pain go away. Poor fool probably sat on them. You smile weakly. You can't help it. Agnes is the opposite of the town physician who visits twice a year and charges silver to misdiagnose everything as bad spleen or insufficient vapors. Agnes doesn't charge. She accepts eggs, bread mending, or stories. And she doesn't pretend to know things she doesn't. She pulls a string of dried mushrooms from her pouch. These are for your dreams, she says. You're not sure if she means to make them stop or make them stranger. Some of her cures are probably dangerous. She once gave your cousin a paste that made his teeth turn black for a week, but his rash vanished. She called it a fair trade. In the cities, apothecaries operate more like shops. They have guilds, rules, shelves upon shelves of labeled jars, arsenic calamine powdered mummy. Yes, real mummy. Ground-up human remains from Egypt were considered both exotic and curative. Whether it cured anything is unclear, but it certainly made funerary theft a booming industry. Other prized substances include bezoar stones from the stomachs of goats, which were believed to neutralize poison. Wealthy nobles wore them on chains, occasionally dunked them in wine, and then drank the wine just in case someone was trying to kill them. Spoiler. Sometimes the bezoars were fakes. Double spoiler, sometimes the poison still worked. Agnes, for all her countryside mystery, doesn't traffic in crushed pharaohs or goat stomachs. She's more of a boil it and pray type. She leaves you with a sachet of rosemary, a bottle of thick green liquid, and instructions not to eat anything round or white until the moon is full. You're too sick to argue. After she's gone, you sip the potion. It tastes like damp cellar and sour moss. But your headache eases. Your coughing quiets. You wonder not for the first time if Agnes is more than she seems. People call her wise woman, herb witch crone. But when the plague comes, they knock on her door first. You hear that in some places women like her are burned. Not because they failed, but because they succeeded too often. One village executed a healer because her potions worked faster than the priest's prayers. Another blamed a woman for stopping a fever that had killed half the town. Must have been the devil's work. Historians still debate whether these women were scientists ahead of their time or simply caretakers in a world where nobody else would help. You fall asleep to the scent of lavender and vinegar. Your fever dreams return, but softer now, less frantic. You dream of walking through a forest filled with glowing herbs. You pluck a plant that sings in your hand. Agnes appears riding a goat and hands you a cup of tea that smells like roasted dirt. You drink it. You wake up. Outside, the wind is picking up. The clouds are gray, heavy with rain or portents or both. You pull your blanket closer and clutch the sachet to your chest. Maybe this one will work. Maybe. Rain drums steadily on the roof, its rhythm soft and hypnotic. It would be soothing if not for the slow, smothering weight settling across your chest. You sit upright, gasping like a bellows, wheezing, heaving. Your lungs feel stuffed with damp wool. Each breath comes sharp and shallow as though the air itself has turned against you. Your mother rushes in with a panicked look, fumbling for the herb pouch Agnes left behind. She thrusts a steaming rag into your hands, eucalyptus maybe, or camphor if you're lucky. You press it over your nose and mouth and inhale. The burn shoots up your nose and straight into your brain. Your eyes water, you don't care, you can breathe again. She props you up with extra straw and pillows, murmuring that it's just your humors acting up again. You know the script by heart. When the four humors go awry, your body spins out of balance. If you're sick, it's not because a virus hijacked your cells. It's because your black bile is having an off week. The entire medical system of your world revolves around these four mysterious fluids: blood phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. They're supposed to live in harmony like a medieval boy band. If one gets too loud, congratulations, you're vomiting again. Right now, your symptoms scream phlegm overload, which means you're cold and wet internally speaking. You need to warm and dry yourself literally and temperamentally. Your mother whispers that you must have been too melancholic lately. That's black bile. Perhaps all the reading or the brooding? You nod weakly, too winded to argue that you don't even know how to read. This kind of diagnosis isn't unique to your village. It's the same in cities, castles, monasteries. From Paris to Prague, healers interpret symptoms like bad poetry, coughing and shivering. Your temperament is phlegmatic, fever and rash choleric, random nosebleed during a sermon definitely sanguine, or maybe divine punishment for sleeping during Mass. Physicians, those who could afford the training, mapped these humors not just to illness, but to your entire personality. A cheerful man was said to have abundant blood, a grump, too much black bile. Women, of course, were generally assumed to have more moisture and coldness, thus more prone to hysteria. How convenient. You've heard of humoral diets, menus crafted to balance these fluids. If you were coughing, you'd be told to eat hot, dry foods like roasted meats and ginger. But if you had a nosebleed, better eat lettuce and drink sour wine. One man reportedly cured his gout by eating only radishes for a month. He died of something else shortly after. One village apothecary wrote a guide claiming that pears cause melancholy and should only be eaten by those with excessive joy. He was not by all accounts a fun dinner guest. Your sister brings in a bowl of hot broth. Inside floats a poached egg and a few withered bits of onion. It's a humoral compromise, warm, soft, easily digestible, and unlikely to offend any bile. You slurp gratefully. When your fever surged last night, your mother sprinkled ground nutmeg on your bedding. It was meant to invigorate the spirit. She also whispered a charm involving Saint Lucy and the moon. You're not sure if it helped, but at least the sheets smell better. You once heard that the Pope's personal physician had a chart listing the best time to treat each humor by season and planetary alignment. Spring was for bloodletting naturally, time of rebirth and open wounds. Summer favored purging yellow bile, fall for black bile, and winter for phlegm. Conveniently, this ensured year-round business. Historians still argue whether humoral medicine was pseudoscience or the only framework available for hundreds of years. Either way, it ruled the body like a tyrant in a robe. Every sneeze had an interpretation, Every cramp had a theory. You lie back and stare at the ceiling. The beams above you are streaked with soot. A spider weaves slowly in the corner. You count its legs for the third time today. Still 8. So far, no hallucinations. That's good. Your mother returns with a pot of mint tea and a slice of toasted barley bread, rubbed with garlic. Not for eating. Oh no. She places it on your chest. Garlic, she says, draws out the dampness. Bread holds the heat. You nod solemnly. Your chest smells like a bakery now. There are other treatments floating around the village today. One woman is attempting to rebalance her humors by sleeping with her head pointed north. Another chews fennel soaked in goat's milk. A third soaks her feet in hot wine every morning to prevent lower body congestion. Everyone's a doctor when the real ones cost a fortune and mispronounce your name. You feel a bit better by afternoon, less shivering, more dozing. You imagine your humors settling like silt in a pond. You wonder what color yours are. Probably murky beige. You once heard a traveler speak of a scholar in Persia who believed in invisible agents that passed disease between people. Everyone laughed at him. Invisible agents? Ridiculous. Far better to rely on the consistency of bleeding people with leeches and hoping their personalities improve. Outside, the rain fades into a light drizzle. Your sister cracks the window for a moment. Fresh air? A luxury, but risky. Some say wind carries disease, especially the east wind, which is rumored to blow madness into your ears. You close your eyes. In your mind, you walk through your own body, knocking on doors, asking the humors to behave. Phlegm mumbles from the corner. Yellow bile is yelling at the walls. Black bile sulks in a closet. Blood's passed out on a couch. It's a mess, but at least now you know where the problem lies. Maybe tomorrow your temperament will shift. Maybe tomorrow you'll wake up with more heat and dryness like a proper choleric hero. Or maybe you'll still be you, sweaty wheezing, wrapped in garlic toast and blessed herbs. Either way, you're learning to live in a body governed by forces no one can see, understand, or agree on. And somehow that's its own kind of survival. You've barely caught your breath when your sister re-enters the room, with something clutched in both hands, a bundle of wrinkled parchment tied with a brittle strip of linen. She places it beside you with great ceremony, as if delivering a royal decree rather than, the village's shared astrological chart. You groan internally, not the stars again. She unfurls the chart carefully. The ink is smudged. The constellations are wobbly. At the top, written in flourish script by someone trying very hard to appear educated, is a bold heading for matters of the body, let the heavens decide. You lean back and sigh. Because here's the thing in your world. Medical advice isn't just pulled from books or herbs, it's plucked from the sky. When you're sick, the diagnosis might depend not on symptoms, but on where Jupiter is loitering this week. Astrology and medicine are woven tighter than your bed linens. Every reputable physician consults a star chart before bleeding, purging, or applying frog paste. Is Mercury in retrograde? Better avoid any procedures involving the liver. Venus in Capricorn. No surgeries near the kidneys. Mars in Aries. That explains the nosebleeds. You glance over the parchment. Your sister is already tracing lines with her finger, muttering that Saturn is oppressing your vital essence, and that your birth under a waning moon might be responsible for your phlegmatic imbalance. You stare at her. She can't read. She's making it up, but somehow she's not entirely wrong. You remember a story perhaps told by a merchant or scribbled in a margin somewhere about a French nobleman who refused treatment for a broken leg because his physician said the moon wasn't in a favorable position. The man died of infection, but at least the planets were unbothered. Another tale, an astrologer once delayed the king's bleeding by 2 days due to an unfortunate alignment involving Mars and a goat. The king survived. The astrologer was knighted. Historians still argue whether that counts as good medicine or excellent luck. The church had mixed feelings about this celestial meddling. On one hand, it bordered on paganism. On the other, the stars were part of God's creation. If they could predict crop failures, why not coughs? Many medical texts, especially in the Islamic world, contained elaborate tables correlating body parts with zodiac signs. Aries ruled the head, Taurus the neck, Gemini the arms, all the way down to Pisces, which got stuck with the feet. A scholar once claimed that treating a headache during Aries season was asking for trouble. Another insisted that performing a foot surgery during Pisces guaranteed divine favor. Your sister says you were born under Virgo. You suspect this means you're supposed to be sensible, modest, and chronically sick. You would argue, but another coughing fit interrupts you. Some villages even have a star watcher, not quite an astronomer, not quite a healer who records planetary positions and gives medical advice based on them. Yours is Old Jory, a man with bad eyesight and worse handwriting. He once declared that everyone should drink goat's milk for a week because Mercury was frowning. No one questioned him. The goats were delighted. Today, according to your sister and the heavens, it's not a good time for sweat-inducing treatments. Mars is angry. Better to stay still, drink cool liquids, and whisper apologies to your spleen. You sip from your cup dutifully. It tastes of mint and rainwater. You stare at the sky chart. In some ways, it makes sense, like an ancient spreadsheet mapping celestial bureaucracy onto your messy, wheezing life. Still, you can't help but wonder, what if it's all just guesswork? What if your fever has nothing to do with Saturn sulking and everything to do with the rat you accidentally stepped on last week? But you keep the chart beside your bed anyway, because questioning it won't make you feel better. And in your world, belief itself is often the strongest medicine. As the day drags on, neighbors drop by to check in. One brings a jar of plum syrup, sticky and thick. Another offers a scrap of paper with a charm scrawled on it, to be placed under the tongue during fever dreams. You smile politely and tuck it beneath your mattress. You hear that in the city, some physicians carry metal instruments called astrolabes to track the stars. They use them before prescribing anything, even if the patient is already unconscious. We cannot interfere with the will of the heavens, they say. Meanwhile, the patient is drooling on the floor. You remember a poem, you once heard a cheeky one. If Mars is red and I see stars, don't treat my gut, just hide the jars. If Venus shines and Jupiter sways, I'll bleed you twice and praise the days. It didn't make much sense then. It doesn't now, but it rhymes so people remembered it. As twilight falls, your sister takes the chart outside and holds it up to the sky, aligning it with constellations that may or may not be visible through the cloud cover. She nods sagely, then announces that tomorrow is an auspicious day for soup. You don't ask what sign soup falls under. Probably Cancer. You drift off to sleep with the stars pressing gently on your mind. In your dreams, they rearrange themselves into diagnostic charts. Orion offers you a spoonful of honey. The Big Dipper turns into a leech. The moon smiles and winks. You wake coughing but oddly reassured. The stars may not cure you, but they give your illness shape. And when everything in your body feels chaotic, having a shape, even one made of fire and myth, is something to cling to. You wake before dawn to the unmistakable sound of sloshing. Not rain, not the cooking pot sloshing, gurgling, flowing. You shuffle to the door and peer out into the street. And there it is, a rivulet of something very much like sewage lazily winding its way past your doorstep. You stare at it for a long time. You sigh. Then you close the door and try to forget what you've just seen. Welcome to Public Health Medieval Edition. Your village doesn't have plumbing. Of course it doesn't. No aqueducts here, those were a Roman thing, and no one's quite figured out how they worked without summoning demons. Your water comes from the well. Everyone's water comes from the well. It's also where people wash their hands, clean vegetables, dump leftover broth, soak laundry, and sometimes let their animals drink, usually in that order. As for where everything goes afterward, well, that's the sloshing. You sit by the hearth with a cup of thin porridge and wonder not for the first time if cleanliness might actually prevent disease. It's a modern thought, dangerous even. You've heard rumors that too much washing can weaken your body's defenses. One scholar in the city declared that bathing opened the pores, which made you more susceptible to invisible humors. Others said water softened the skin, making it easier for illness to sneak in. The safest bet, then, is to avoid water entirely. You've taken this advice to heart. You can't remember the last time you truly bathed. The closest you get is a sponge rub with stale beer and herbs, which mostly just rearranges the dirt. Your clothes haven't been boiled in months. They stand up on their own when you set them down. And you're not unusual. In fact, you're better off than most. Some folks don't change their underclothes all winter. They say it traps the heat. One man in the next village over claimed that sleeping in manure kept his feet warm and his bowels regular. You assume he was single. Still, there's a growing awareness, whispers, murmurs, that maybe filth isn't as harmless as everyone pretends. Take latrines, for instance. If you live in a wealthier home, you might have a chamber pot usually dumped out the window with a polite gardy-loo. That's your one moment of civility before gravity and gravity's consequences take over. If you're poorer, you find a field or a bush or a spot behind the woodpile. Then you move slightly the next day. Streets in larger towns are worse. Open drains, cesspits, piles of rotting waste. Horses and dogs add their contributions. So do people. You've heard that some cities hire gong farmers, brave souls who clean cesspools at night. They earn good coin and probably lose their sense of smell by age 20. Even indoors, danger lurks. That smoky hearth you love so much it's filling your lungs with soot. Your windows are sealed tight against the cold, trapping every breath, every cough. Agnes once told you that the air in your cottage could cure bacon. She wasn't joking, and yet towns are trying. Sort of. Some places have passed cleanliness laws. One city requires all residents to sweep the street in front of their home once a week. Another mandates that waste be dumped outside the city gates, though no one enforces it. Still, another hires men to walk through the market and throw buckets of rosewater at suspected plague sites. Symbolic, yes. Effective, absolutely not. There's one recorded case of a town installing public hand-washing stations during a bout of illness. They were built from stone filled with brackish water and abandoned within days after someone mistook them for holy fountains and stole the coins tossed inside. Historians still argue whether the attempt counts as public health progress or performance art. But the greatest danger isn't just what's in the streets, it's what's in the air. You hear it constantly: bad smells, bad health. Miasma theory reigns supreme. If something stinks, it must be poisoning you. That's why people walk around with herbs stuffed in their noses or wear sachets of lavender. The rich even wear beaked masks filled with perfume, especially during plague season. You saw one once, a plague doctor. His black robes looked like crow feathers, his long nose like a sharpened beak. The children ran from him. You stayed inside. It wasn't just the mask, it was what it meant. He only visited the houses no one came back out of. Today, you catch a whiff of something sharp, acidic like vinegar and smoke. You glance outside and see a neighbor waving a smoking pot near her doorway. She's burning sulfur, an effort to clean the air. She coughs. You cough. You both wave awkwardly. Some homes have herbs tied to beams. Others keep animals out front not for farming, but because they believe chickens or pigs can absorb illness meant for humans. One family built a special pen for their goat, swearing it was the reason no one in the house had died yet. The goat looks unimpressed. Inside, your sister wipes down surfaces with vinegar. Not because it kills germs, she doesn't know what those are, but because it smells strong. And in a world where illness smells bad, something that smells worse must surely fix it. There's a certain logic in it, really. If you can't see the enemy, at least you can outsmell it. You once heard a tale about a city that fought off plague by burning barrels of pitch in the streets. It didn't help, but it did keep everyone indoors. One man tried to create a giant air funnel to pull sickness out of homes. Another walked around town with an enormous bell, ringing it rhythmically to scare the fevers away. It worked until someone threw a bucket at him. As evening falls, you return inside and try not to think about the world beyond your door. The dampness, the filth, the fumes. You light a small candle, boil a pot of thyme and mint, and let the steam fill the room. It makes the air smell cleaner. Whether or not it does anything, it comforts you. Maybe one day people will understand how illness really works. That it travels silently, invisibly, not on smells, but on breath and touch and time. But until then, you hold tight to your herbs, your vinegar, your smoke. Because in your world, health isn't about cures. It's about survival through ritual repetition and a firm belief that keeping your goat close and your chamber pot farther might just tip the balance. You're awakened at dawn by a noise you dread, the deep groaning creak of wooden wheels and the soft shuffle of straw-filled boots. The death cart is making its rounds again. You sit up slowly, heart beating too loudly in your chest. Your fever has cooled for now, but you know better than to trust it. Illness in your world is like a thief with a key. It comes and goes when it pleases, and sometimes it leaves a window open for something worse. You peek out the slats of your window. Two men walk beside the cart, their faces wrapped in cloth. Not for protection, there's no such thing as germ theory here, but to block the smell. They don't knock, they don't shout. The cart moves silently today. That's worse somehow. They pass your home. Good, not today. But just across the green they stop. A door opens slowly. A boy steps out, eyes hollow, lips cracked. He says nothing, just points inside. One of the cart men nods. They disappear into the house. You close your eyes. In a few minutes they reemerge with a wrapped body. No name spoken, no tears, just routine. The cart creaks on. Hospitals, as you might hope they exist, are not the answer here. You've heard of them, yes. Maybe there's one in the city. Maybe. But hospitals in the Middle Ages are not places where you go to be healed. They are places you go to die in order. If you're lucky enough to be admitted, usually only if you're poor orphaned, or obviously on the brink, they'll give you a bed. Not a room. A bed. In a row. In a hall. Under a leaking roof beside someone whose cough sounds worse than yours and who occasionally moans out confessions to saints you've never heard of. The care food if you can keep it down. A blanket if one is clean. Holy water. A priest. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, a nun who knows how to cool a fever with willow bark and whisper lullabies in Latin. It's not that people don't want to help, it's that they don't know how. And then there are the rules. Hospitals run by religious orders often segregate the sick by illness or by perceived sin. Women in one area, men in another. Leprosy. You'll be outside across the field, past the wall behind the gate that doesn't open from the inside. Leper hospitals or leprosaria are something else entirely. Entire towns sometimes of people slowly falling apart. Exiled not just from health, but from society. Some wear bells around their necks to warn others. Some have no noses. Others sing hymns constantly, not from joy, but because silence is unbearable. You remember your uncle's cousin who was sent to one. He was marked, they said. No one ever explained what that meant. You just know he left and never came back. One fringe tale tells of a leprosarium where a young woman kept honeybees. They say she could tell who would live or die based on whether the bees stayed on the body after stinging it. Historians still argue whether that's metaphoric poetic or just nonsense. You asked Agnes once if she ever visited a hospital. She snorted. They bury you slower, that's all she said. Monasteries sometimes double as infirmaries, though mostly for their own. The monkish medicine is part spiritual, part experimental. They keep records of a sort. Little books with entries like Brother Alric coughed blood today. Gave him boiled nettles, died anyway. God be praised. You imagine a monk scratching that note in the margin while eating cold peas and humming a hymn? There's one story that stuck with you of a monastery where the infirmary was decorated with paintings of saints being martyred, flayed, burned, shot with arrows. It was meant to inspire courage. You're not sure it worked. Some hospitals hire keepers, not healers, just people to turn bodies. Change linens, chase rats. Their wages are paid in scraps and shelter. They often die within months. No one tracks the turnover. You once met a woman who survived a hospital stay. She called it a miracle. Said a young novice put mint leaves on her chest every day and sat beside her all night whispering prayers. When the fever broke, she was too weak to walk, but alive enough to crawl out. She's missing a toe now. She laughs about it. You admire her for that. Back in your room, your sister returns with a clean cloth and a pot of something hot. She doesn't mention the cart. You both pretend you didn't see it. That's how you stay sane. You sip the broth. It's thin but warm. She adjusts your blankets and asks if you feel strong enough to sit up. You nod. She tells you a hospital opened 2 towns over. Says they've got iron beds and separate wards. Says they even wash the floors. You both laugh. That's the part that sounds impossible. She kisses your forehead, careful not to linger. No one lingers. Not anymore. The candle burns low. Outside, the cart is gone. The silence returns. And for now, you're not in a hospital. You're not wrapped in linens on a plank. You're still in your home, still surrounded by smells you recognize by walls that hold stories and smoke by people who still hope. That alone is worth something. The sun is already slipping behind the hills when you hear the tap-tap of a crooked walking stick outside your door. Not urgent, not official, just the slow rhythm of someone who walks not by schedule but by seasons and stars. You recognize the sound. You don't even need to look. It's the village-wise woman again, Agnes. You're not surprised. She always returns after dark, never in haste, always in time. Tonight she brings a different energy, though. There's something tighter in her brow, something sharper in the lines of her mouth. She enters without knocking. No one expects her to. She's not here as a guest. She's here as necessity. She sets her satchel down and begins unpacking items with ritual slowness. Some you recognize: a bundle of dried sage, 2 onions, a cracked jar filled with what looks like melted wax. Others are stranger. A dried lizard's foot tied with twine. A feather, a shard of mirror. You try not to ask questions. Agnes doesn't answer them anyway. She lights a taper and moves around your small room, waving the smoke in slow circles, muttering phrases that drift somewhere between prayer and poetry. She steps over your feet without acknowledging them. You are present, yes, but you are not the center of this ritual. This is the realm of the women who work in shadow, the ones who carry knowledge too practical to be priestly and too effective to be harmless. They go by many names: healer, midwife, witch. And in many places, those names are interchangeable depending mostly on how successful their remedies are. You've heard the stories. Everyone has. A woman in the next valley was burned after curing 3 men of fever in the same week. Another was accused of poisoning livestock when her love potion backfired. Agnes herself was once summoned before a magistrate for concerning herb work. She showed him a poultice that cured his daughter's rash. He let her go. Very quickly. Tonight she's come not to heal but to protect. There's a difference. She lays down iron nails at each corner of the room. You raise a brow? She grunts. To keep out the death wind, she says, and anything that rides with it. Your sister, seated silently in the corner, clasps her hands and watches in awe. Agnes catches her staring and throws her a turnip. Stop gawking. Wash this. We'll need it. You obey. Not because you understand, but because everyone obeys Agnes. She asks for milk. Soured is fine, and honey if it's available. Your sister disappears into the pantry and returns with both. Agnes mixes them with crushed thyme and something bitter smelling. She smears the mixture along the doorframe to ward away sickness, to keep in the warmth, to confuse any spirit trying to count its way in. You nod as if this all makes sense. You've given up trying to distinguish medicine from magic. In your world, the line is faint and most often completely ignored. Wise women like Agnes live in that foggy in-between, half healer, half hedge witch. They attend births, ease fevers, cure rashes, and silence nightmares. And when things go wrong, they take the blame. But only if the patient survives long enough to speak. You've seen her charm warts off with incantations, stop bleeding with pressure, and whispered verses even call bees away from a child's face just by humming. She claims none of it is magic, it's knowing, she says, and timing. Tonight she lays a silver coin under your pillow and tells you not to move it until morning. For the spirits, she says. You don't ask what kind. She ties a piece of red string around your wrist, for the blood. Then she crushes a dried leaf between her fingers, sprinkles the powder into your tea, and mutters something so soft, even the fire strains to hear it. You sip the tea, bitter, earthy, oddly grounding. She turns to your sister and murmurs instructions where to place the onions, when to relight the coals, how to fold the linen so the seams face inward. Old rituals, the kind passed down, not in books, but in habits and hushes. There's a comfort in it. These gestures, these half-remedies and half-prayers are woven deep into your life. You've grown up with them. And even if you can't explain them, you feel them working, like gravity or grief. One tale says the wise woman in a nearby village once brought a man back from death with only a kiss and a handful of nettles. Another claims she turned a fever away by tying rosemary to her own ankle and walking in circles until the sun rose. There's even a story that Agnes herself once outstared a plague rat until it turned around and left. Historians, of course, argue about these tales. Are they metaphor? Are they exaggeration? Are they rooted in any scientific principle at all? But you don't care, because here's the truth that never gets written. Even if the cure is imaginary, hope isn't. And hope tonight is what Agnes brings in handfuls. She finishes her work and stands at the doorway silhouetted against the now gentle firelight. She doesn't speak, just nods once, then turns and leaves without another word. The room smells different now. Stronger, stranger, safer. You sink into your bedding, the red thread warm against your wrist. The silver coin tucked under your head presses against your thoughts like a quiet promise. Outside the wind howls, but it doesn't enter, and for the first time in days you fall asleep without coughing. You awaken to the faint jingle of bells and the rustle of heavy fabric. At first, you think it's another dream, one of those floating, feverish visions where saints ride donkeys through your kitchen and offer you bread made of light. But no, this is real. The rustling gets louder, the bells sharper, and then you hear it laughter. Polished, soft laughter, like someone who's never had to boil water twice just to be sure it's not deadly. The door creaks open, and in walks something you haven't seen in weeks: velvet. Deep blue velvet, trimmed in gold, worn by someone with cheeks flushed from wine, not fever. Their boots are clean. Their teeth are suspiciously symmetrical. A noble, or at least noble adjacent. He enters your home like he owns it, accompanied by a man with a notebook and a servant carrying what appears to be a perfumed cushion. You blink at them from your bed, your fever returning not from illness, but from sheer confusion. Is this the one the velvet man asks, gesturing toward you with a gloved hand? The man with the notebook nods. The cushion bearer sets his pillow, presumably gently on the cleanest corner of your bench. Good, the nobleman says. I want to see it myself. You're not entirely sure what it is. Your fever. Your bandaged arm. The goatskin sachet still tied to your elbow. He leans over you and smiles, broad, polished, empty. So you're the peasant who hasn't died yet. You cough. On him, you feel marginally better. Nobles, you see, get sick too. Just like the rest of you. But unlike you, they do it in style. Their sheets are imported linen. Their wine is spiced and warm. Their physicians wear fur-trimmed gowns and debate your bile levels in Latin. They sip broth made from quail, not cabbage ends. And they never ever apply mustard to the chest without first consulting the stars. The idea of illness to them is more a nuisance than a terror, an interruption between falconry and banquets, a chance to test that new physician from Italy who's been talking about blood circulation again. You hear he uses leeches with engraved silver teeth. Their treatments are elaborate. Saffron-infused teas, pearl powder mixed with honey, a poultice made of violets and silk. Nothing that actually works, but all of it expensive enough to make them feel reassured. One noblewoman you once heard about insisted her physician fill the room with songbirds whenever she was unwell. To keep the spirits lifted, she said. The birds reportedly did not share her enthusiasm. You also hear of a prince who paid a wizard to chant over his chamber pot before relieving himself in hopes of expelling illness through the correct orifice. The results were never recorded. Your visitor paces the room now, tapping his chin with one gloved finger. What have we got here? Fever-choleric imbalance, or perhaps a possession? He says this last part with a wink, as though your potential demonic affliction is simply a lively conversation starter. You wonder if he's ever truly been afraid. Afraid like you were lying on the floor, lungs rattling, watching shadows dance while your sister wept in the next room. Somehow you doubt it. He turns to the man with the notebook. Write down the symptoms. Might be useful for the pamphlet. The man nods, scribbling. You wonder how he spells wheezing. You hope he adds smells faintly of cooked onions. The noble sits now carefully on the edge of the bench, feet crossed delicately as if illness might stain his boots. Tell me, he says, leaning in again. How does it feel to be sick for this long? Does the body betray the mind, or the other way around? You blink, then cough again, more deliberately this time. He smiles. Ah, philosopher. He glances at the servant. Bring the sample. You freeze. Sample. The servant produces a small glass jar and a tiny ladle. Oh no, you've heard of this. The nobles are obsessed with examination. In some circles, the study of urine has become the height of diagnostic science. They call it uroscopy. Doctors swirl your urine in a clear glass vessel, hold it to the light, and gaze into it like a fortune teller reading tea leaves. Yellow. You're healthy. Cloudy fever. Red-tinged, definitely plague. Frothy? You might be pregnant or cursed. You snatch the jar from his hands and tuck it under your blanket. No samples today. He shrugs, not offended. He's already moved on, pointing out the layout of your home, commenting on the herbal bundles sniffing the air. They say peasants often recover faster than the rich, he muses. Perhaps it's the simplicity. No competing treatments, no confusion from too many options. You raise a brow? Yes, simplicity. The kind that comes from not being able to afford anything else. Before he leaves, he drops a silver coin on your chest. For your trouble, he says, it's not a bribe, it's a souvenir. You consider keeping it. You also consider hurling it at his retreating head. In the end, you let it fall to the floor. He exits with the same dramatic swish of cloak with which he entered all perfume and performance. The servant gathers the pillow, the notes, the empty jar, and follows. The door closes. Silence. You lie still for a while, breathing in the space he left behind. It smells better, less like velvet, more like survival. You think of all the others, your friends, your neighbors, your sister, none of whom will ever sip saffron or own a silver spoon. But they'll hold your hand when you're shaking. They'll brew the last of the herbs without asking. They'll sit through the night just to see you blink in the morning, and somehow you suspect that means more than songbirds and imported silk. The next morning begins with the sound of raised voices outside your window. Not angry, not frightened. Just agitated in that way people get when they're about to argue over something none of them actually understand. You pull yourself up groaning. Your fever's dipped again, which only makes the ache in your joints more noticeable. Still, curiosity tugs at you. You shuffle to the window and peer out. A gathering's formed by the well. Not the usual queue for water, but a knot of men in long robes, doctors. Not your village's rough barbers or wandering herb women, but the kind who wear dark wool, carry books they can't bear to loan, and speak in slow, deliberate syllables that make everything they say sound more authoritative than it probably is. They're here to discuss, you sigh. You've seen this before. Scholars from different towns, sometimes from the nearby monastery, sometimes just curious students sent by wealthier patrons come together to do what they do. Best debate the causes of disease with absolute certainty and zero consensus. One of them tall with a wide-brimmed hat and far too much red trim on his sleeves holds forth on humoral imbalance. The fever is clearly due to excess choler. He insists, waving his hand like he's swatting away ignorance. The body is too hot, too dry. You must cool the patient. Apply cucumber slices and willow bark. Bleed from the left arm only. The second shorter, with ink stains on his cuffs and a wild look in his eyes, snorts. You fool, it's miasmatic. The bad air? It enters through the nostrils and settles in the chest. You must burn sulfur, bathe the patient's feet in cold water, and bleed from the right arm. The third doesn't speak yet. He's flipping through a well-worn manuscript, probably Avicenna or Galen. His lips move slightly as he reads. You know this type. He won't speak until everyone's lost interest. Then he'll mutter something so ambiguous that no one can argue with it. Meanwhile, someone has brought a stool for Agnes, who sits nearby with her arms folded, watching them like a cat watches birds it's not hungry enough to eat. You shuffle outside, blanket draped over your shoulders like a cape. The crowd parts slightly to let you through. Sick people still command a certain quiet awe, like survivors of storms or bear attacks. You stand quietly near the edge as the debate rolls on. Words fly. Terms like putrefaction vapors, bile, dominance, intestinal fermentation, and celestial alignment make frequent appearances. Every suggestion contradicts the last. Every statement is delivered with the confidence of a man who's never had to eat boiled nettles for lunch. Someone suggests trepanning, drilling a hole in the skull to let out the fever. You take a slow step back. Another suggests using magnetized iron to pull illness from the blood. The logic is unclear, but the words are heavy, so people nod. Then finally, the man with the book speaks. Perhaps the illness is both internal and external. Perhaps it enters with the wind but finds fertile ground in melancholy. We should purge the mind as well as the body. No one knows what this means. They nod anyway. Historians still argue whether medieval medical debates advanced science or simply prolonged bad ideas with fancier vocabulary. Watching these men, you lean toward the latter. But here's the thing they are trying. With all their charts, contradictions, and chalk drawings they want to understand, they're fumbling in the dark, just like you. You sit on the stone step letting the morning sun warm your feet. The arguments fade into background noise. Agnes hands you a peeled apple. Doctors, she mutters. They love words more than wounds. You bite the apple. It's tart, but it helps. One of the younger physicians approaches you. He's barely older than your sister, and his robe is too long, clearly borrowed. He kneels beside you. You've survived longer than most, he says. May I ask what you've taken? You think for a moment. Willow bark tea? Burned sage? Bread with garlic? 3 leeches, a charm from Agnes, silver coin under the pillow, and nettles you add, remembering suddenly. Boiled. Tasted like boiled nettle. He scribbles this down as if you've just unveiled the key to eternal life. You don't correct him, let him have his moment. Across the square, someone sneezes. Everyone freezes. The tall doctor immediately points toward the nearest herb bundle. Fumigate that household. The short one shouts, no, seal the windows. The one with the book mutters, sneeze is a sign of soul imbalance. Agnes just sighs and mutters something about onion poultices and idiots. In the afternoon, the scholars hold a public lecture by the chapel. They draw diagrams in the dirt with sticks. One illustrates the flow of bile using a squashed plum. Another uses bread crust to represent the lungs. A boy eats the lungs and is promptly scolded. Your sister attends the whole thing. She returns wide-eyed and says she learned that blood should only be let on Tuesdays and that the moon affects digestion. You smile. She believes it. Why not? Belief, like illness, spreads easily. As night falls, the physicians pack their books, their ink-stained fingers, and their rolling contradictions and head back toward town. The crowd disperses. Agnes stays. Of course she does. You lie back on your bed and stare at the ceiling. You can still hear their voices echoing in your head. Too much bile, too little heat. Lunar imbalance, nasal vapors, none of it helped. But it felt like something was being done. And in your world, that's often the best medicine available. The next day dawns damp and quiet. A fog hangs low over the village as if the earth itself is holding its breath. You wake to a strange sound music, not the kind played in noble halls or sung by choir boys. This is rougher, more playful. A lute, maybe, a tin whistle, and someone attempting to sing in a key that never existed. You shuffle to the window. There, at the edge of the square, stands a bright-colored wagon with crooked wheels and peeling paint. Beside it, a man in a striped cloak performs exaggerated gestures, bowing deeply to a crowd of villagers who haven't had this much entertainment since Agnes accidentally set fire to her apron last spring. You blink eyes, still crusty. But your mind catches up quickly, a traveling healer. You've seen his kind before. Part performer, part apothecary, part salesman. He'll have a miracle tonic. He'll demonstrate a cure on a half-willing volunteer. He'll declare war on your humors and then vanish by sundown. The man finishes his song, something about a liver stolen by fairies, and then waves his arms with a flourish. Good folk, sick folk. Slightly peckish folk, he shouts. I bring you healing from distant lands, ancient secrets, and the very edge of reason. A few villagers clap. Others squint skeptically. He produces a bottle from his cloak. The label reads Dr. Dobler's tonic for all ills, including but not limited to fever's flux, warts, bad dreams, unhappy marriages, and goats who refuse to milk. He hands it to a woman with a limp and asks her to take a sip. She does, grimacing. Now dance, he commands. She takes 3 awkward steps sideways, mostly to escape the spotlight. He claps triumphantly. Cured. You watch from your doorstep, amused. You've been through too much to fall for it, but it's still entertaining. Traveling healers like him are a fixture in this part of the world. They wander from village to village, cart in tow, spouting rhymes and half-truths. They sell tonics brewed from wine sugar herbs and sometimes opium, though they never say the word. Their potions are vague on ingredients, but rich in adjectives, invigorating, purifying, fortifying, occasionally even electrifying. One once sold you something he called sunshine water. It made your vision blur and your legs go numb for half a day. You never did figure out what was in it. Possibly radish wine. This particular showman is better than most. He juggles. He sings. He has a 3-legged dog named Martin who performs tricks and growls on cue. Children laugh. Even Agnes watches from the back, arms crossed, not quite disapproving. But for all the theater, there's something real behind it. Not in the medicine, perhaps, but in the attention. In a world where sickness is routine and dying is mundane, this man treats illness like a challenge to be conquered. Dramatically, loudly, with style, he invites the village to step forward and tell him their woes. One man complains of swollen joints. The healer pokes the knee, nods gravely, then wraps it in cloth, soaked in what he calls volcanic essence. You suspect it's gin and lavender oil. Still, the man limps away with a smile. A girl with headaches is told to sleep with a fennel bulb under her pillow. A woman with heavy thoughts is prescribed raspberry leaves and daily laughter. The laughter, she's told, is non-negotiable. You chuckle. Not because you believe him, but because for a moment you remember what it's like to be seen, not just as a body that might expire soon, but as a person worth charming. At midday, he walks through the village offering diagnostics. He holds your wrist and stares at your nails. Ah, he says, too much moonlight and guilt, possibly pickled turnips. You'll need 3 drops of this and a week of peace. You raise an eyebrow. Where would I find peace? He smiles. That part's on you. He leaves you a small vial. It smells of licorice and something spicy. You tuck it under your pillow next to Agnes's silver coin. By evening, his crowd has grown. He lights torches, sings louder. The village hasn't seen this much joy since the harvest dance, when half the participants got blisters from wearing shoes for the first time in months. But not everyone's convinced. Old Jory the Star Watcher mutters that the man's aura is imbalanced. A few devout types whisper that he hasn't invoked a saint once. One woman claims her goat sneezed after sniffing the tonic. It's unnatural, she insists. You've learned to take it all with a pinch of salt, or in this case, a spoonful of honey with powdered cinnamon. That's another one of his recipes. Some traveling healers are outright frauds. One years ago sold fireproof ointment before running from a torch juggling accident. Another offered miracle dust that turned out to be crushed eggshells mixed with soot. You still remember the villagers sneezing soot for a week, but others they try. They know just enough to ease pain. They carry herbs your village doesn't grow. They've seen things boils in Belgium, fevers in Florence, stomach pains in Spain. They don't stay long, but they bring stories, perspective, sometimes even hope. The healer finishes his performance with the song, slow, quiet, unexpectedly sweet. It's about a boy who wandered too far, got sick, and was saved by the laughter of strangers. You lie in bed that night, the tune echoing in your ears. You sip a drop of the tonic. It burns a little, then warms. Your lungs feel clearer. Or maybe it's just the honey. You think of all the people who've treated you barbers, monks, mothers, wise women, scholars, star watchers, and now this jester doctor with a dog. You're still alive. That in itself feels like a kind of cure. You wake to the sound of chewing, specifically your own chewing. Your sister has left a small bowl of boiled barley and roasted apple at your bedside, and without even thinking, your body decided it was time to eat. You didn't ask it. It just started. And that might be the most hopeful sign you've had all week. Because if you're well enough to chew, you're well enough to notice how terrible barley tastes when it's been overcooked and forgotten on a smoky hearth. You stretch. Slowly. Everything creaks. Your muscles feel like soggy rope, but your head no longer pulses with fever. Your mouth, while dry, no longer tastes like spoiled garlic. For the first time in days, your own body feels slightly less like an unpredictable haunted house. And now that you're returning to your senses, one question begins to form in your mind, drifting up like mist from a warm swamp. What exactly have you been eating? Not just the apple barley mess, but in general, what is the medieval diet when you're sick? You look around. On the table rests a crust of bread that's gone stiff, a cracked cup with broth residue, and a few sprigs of parsley hung upside down to absorb illness. Food in your world isn't just sustenance, it's strategy, or at least theory, or occasionally superstitions soaked in gravy. The poor like you eat whatever you can get. Gruel, root vegetables, stale bread softened in beer, cabbage, occasionally eggs. On rare days, meat usually salted or smoked beyond recognition. But when someone falls ill, the menu changes. Immediately, you're forbidden heavy foods. No beans, no fatty meat, no hard cheese. They're said to clog the system and anger your humors. Anything greasy must go. Anything rich is suspect. You're given cooling foods, lettuce broth, boiled leeks. Bread crust soaked in vinegar. Wine diluted until it's practically sadness in a cup. If your fever is especially bad, someone might suggest eating cold porridge with crushed mint. It doesn't help, it just confuses you. If you're lucky, someone offers a pottage, a stew of everything that wasn't moldy in the kitchen. Onion, parsnip, garlic barley. Once a mouse got in, no one mentioned it. For the wealthy, sickroom dining is a whole different affair. Nobles have diet plans, actual documents crafted by their physicians. These plans classify every known food by qualities: hot, cold, wet, dry. Roasted pheasant might be hot and dry. Milk is cold and moist. Everything must be balanced. Get it wrong and your humors revolt. You once heard of a noblewoman who refused to eat grapes because they were moistening to the spleen. Her physician gave her boiled thistles instead. She died of unrelated causes. Probably, for those with resources, there's also spiced wine, honeyed almonds, sugared ginger. These are cordials said to restore energy and warm the spirit. You've tasted one once. It nearly burned a hole in your tongue. Worth it. Agnes Ever the pragmatist believes in food that smells alive. If it stinks of garlic and bruises the tongue, she once told you, then it's working. Her preferred sickroom staples garlic broth, nettle stew, and occasionally a strange green paste she swears is made from boiled radish leaves and determination. There's an old belief that hunger can starve a fever out. Some healers suggest fasting entirely for a day or two to deny the illness a host. Others say that's lunacy. Your mother splits the difference by making food so bland your appetite disappears on its own. You sip some broth, it's warm, unpleasant, but it goes down easily. There's a distant memory you're clinging to now of a feast years ago. You were maybe 10. Someone got married or maybe survived a bad winter. There was meat, actual roasted meat, and honey cakes, and tiny apples stuffed with nuts. You ate until you were dizzy. Your stomach still dreams of that day. That kind of abundance doesn't happen when you're sick, or poor, or both. But food has always been more than fuel in your world. It's part of the ritual. Old women say a stew must simmer for a full moon to calm the belly. Others insist you chew each bite of barley bread exactly 33 times. You don't, but your cousin tried once. He fell asleep mid-chew. Some sickroom diets include wine warm diluted laced with cinnamon or cloves. Not for intoxication, but to move the blood. One village elder drinks it every night, sick or not. He says it keeps the demons away. He has very clean teeth for someone who's 84. But perhaps the oddest food remedy you've heard comes from the coastal towns where sailors claim to cure coughs by swallowing small fish whole to scrape the throat clean. You tried it once. Never again. Historians still argue whether medieval diets helped or hindered recovery. Some say the low-protein, high-carb meals prolonged illness. Others argue that the simplicity kept people from digesting themselves in desperation. One theory suggests that onion soup alone prevented entire villages from perishing, not because of its healing properties, but because no one wanted to come near the breath of the sick. Tonight, your sister brings you a new dish. Flatbread baked with thyme and lard. It smells delicious. She smiles proudly. You eat it slowly, chewing like it's sacred. It might be. Later, as you rest, your mind wanders to all the things you might eat when you're well again. Real cheese. Meat that isn't jerky. Something sweet, maybe. You dream of a warm pastry filled with berries, though you've never tasted such a thing. You drift off full, not just from food, but from the comfort that someone bothered to cook for you at all. In a world of fevers and filthy streets, healing sometimes starts with a bite. It begins with a cough, not yours for once. You're sitting by the hearth, wrapped in every blanket your family owns, sipping onion broth with far too much sage in it when your neighbor's boy stumbles across the green, clutching his stomach. He doesn't cry. He doesn't moan. He just sits down in the dirt, quietly shivering. Then he vomits. The village pauses. That kind of silence doesn't come often. Birds stop chirping, someone drops a spoon, and then without a word, people begin stepping backward. You already know what it is. Everyone does. You've seen it before. Plague. The word isn't shouted. It doesn't have to be. It slips between the cracks in the silence, slithers up spines, and settles behind eyes like a second shadow. You feel it tightening in your own chest, not as sickness, but as memory. Because the plague never really leaves, it just retreats until it's bored again. By evening, 2 more houses have hung bundles of herbs in their doorways. The bells have been taken out of storage. Someone starts digging a pit behind the church. It's happening again. You lie awake that night, listening. Not for coughing, but for quiet. That's when you know it's serious. The stillness is louder than screams. In the morning, the door to the baker's house is marked with a white X. That's new. Last time it was a red smear. Before that, just rumors. You hear someone talking about fumigating with pitch. Another suggests killing all the dogs. Someone even mentions draining the well. You know these measures. You've seen them tried. You've seen them fail. Back in your bed, you try to piece together the steps. How does it arrive? How does it spread rats, maybe? Fleas? Or is it the air or the laundry line? Or that fig you ate 3 days ago? Historians still argue whether it was Yersinia pestis or something else entirely. A single bacterium or a cocktail of grief, filth, and fear. In your world, there are no microscopes, no antibiotics, no understanding, just rituals and guesses. You think of the plague mass, the beaked one stuffed with dried rose petals, cinnamon, and cloves. You saw one once during the last wave. The man inside never spoke. He stood like a shadow in your doorway, nodded once, and vanished down the path. You remember thinking he looked like a bird come to deliver a sermon to the dying. Agnes arrives before lunch. She's not panicking. She never panics. She carries garlic vinegar salt. She smears them along your window frame, murmuring words under her breath that you can't quite catch. When you ask her what to do, she says, "Stay warm. Drink strong things and don't speak of it after dark." That last part catches you. Why not after dark? She shrugs. Old habit. Once you name it in shadow, it listens. You nod. You don't ask again. By evening, the village square is nearly empty. No fires are lit. Doors are shut early. It's like the world has folded in on itself. Your sister boils everything herbs rag spoons. She makes you wear a sachet of mint around your neck and chew fennel seeds before bed. You do it without argument. Some villagers begin fasting. Others burn rosemary in every room. A few gather at the church and chant prayers until their voices crack. And then it happens. You hear the bell, not the usual church bell, but the dull wooden clack of the plague cart. The one with iron wheels and a man who calls out without emotion. "Bring out your dead." The sound turns your blood cold. You peek through the shutters. The cart rolls slowly, pulled by a tired mule. Two men in cloaks stand beside it, faces covered. They stop at the marked house. A shape is carried out limp, wrapped anonymous. You don't cry, you can't. There's something about plague that dries the soul first. Grief comes later when it's safe. The next day you wake sweating. Not a lot, just enough to panic. Your breath catches. Is this it? You lie still counting heartbeats. But it passes. The sweating stops. Your breath evens. Just a dream, maybe. Or a ghost symptom. You drink nettle tea and eat nothing. Safer that way. You spend the day indoors clutching a warm brick wrapped in cloth. It doesn't help, but it feels like a plan. Agnes returns in the afternoon with new orders. Drink no cold water, sleep with a copper spoon under your tongue. Don't look into mirrors. That last one is especially serious. You ask why. She says, because mirrors remember. You don't ask again. By week's end, 4 houses are marked. The cart comes daily now. People stop looking out the window. You start keeping track who's gone, who's sick, who's silent. One boy carves crosses into his wall with charcoal. One for each name. When he runs out of space, he starts on the floor. There's a rumor that in the city they're stacking bodies in the church. That priests have stopped giving last rites. That they burn the clothes and throw holy water on the ashes. You believe it. One old man tries to leave the village. He's stopped at the gate. Not by guards, by a silence, the kind that holds knives behind its back. He returns to his home, locks the door, no one sees him again. And still you wait. Feverless for now. Hungry always. But you've become something else, not sick. Not well, just suspended. A limbo of hope and dread. Your sister hums while she works. The same song over and over. A lullaby your mother used to sing. Neither of you speak of what might happen if she starts coughing next. You lie awake that night and wonder what people will say of this century if it ever ends. Will they call it brave, tragic, dirty? You wonder if anyone will remember the names of those who died silently in tiny villages far from kings and chronicles. You wonder if surviving will make you stronger or just lonelier. Outside, the cart clatters by. This time you don't look. You've looked enough. The plague cart hasn't come in 2 days. No one speaks of it aloud, of course. That would be tempting fate. But the absence of wheels creaking through mud of the hollow clack of wood on wood is its own strange kind of music. The village exhales slightly, but no one dares call it safety. You felt it yourself, a shift in the air, subtle but real. Not recovery exactly, just less death. You're still weak, still coughing in the mornings. But you've reached the stage where you're hungry for more than broth, and that feels miraculous. Your sister brings you bread toasted over the hearth and a fried egg, an actual egg like a festival day. You eat slowly, reverently, and you notice something else, something you had pushed away for weeks. Your sister is pregnant. You hadn't seen it at first. The way her shawl had grown looser, the way she avoided lifting heavy pots. But now, sitting by the fire, rubbing her lower back with a slow rhythm, it's undeniable. You open your mouth to ask but stop. She sees the question in your eyes and simply nods. You feel your throat tighten, but not from illness. Because in the world you live in, childbirth is not just a beginning, it's a gamble. A high-stakes roll of the dice with no rules and very few winners. She says it's still early. She smiles. She's brave. You try to smile back, but your inside's not. You've seen too much to be at ease. Medieval childbirth is brutal, dangerous, raw. There are no sterile instruments, no epidurals, no clean linens unless you're rich. No knowledge of what's actually going on inside the body beyond the baby is upside down, and try not to die. When the time comes, it won't be a physician at her side. It will be Agnes, or someone like her. Midwives are the true miracle workers of this era. Women who've seen every variation of birth and death and still come when summoned. They bring hot water, sharp knives, steady hands. They carry herbs in their aprons and saints in their mouths. They whisper charms and shout orders. And sometimes they carry the baby out alive. Sometimes. You remember when your neighbor bled out in bed with her sixth child. The priest arrived too late to save her, but just in time to suggest she died piously. Her husband blamed the midwife. So did the village. No one said anything when Agnes left town for a few months. Childbirth is sacred, yes, but also terrifying. In your world, it's a rite of passage, a battlefield, a lottery ticket paid in blood. You've heard the whispered stories, women who gave birth to still children with teeth. Women who labored for 3 days until the baby came out silent. Women who never stopped bleeding. Women who clawed at the walls, begging for the pain to end. And of course, the women who survived, they're quieter, fewer, but stronger in the way mountains are strong, not because they never broke, but because they've broken and still stand. You ask your sister if she's afraid. She shrugs. Everyone's afraid. Then she adds, "But I want it. I want something good to come from this year. Something that wasn't sickness." You don't say anything. You can't. Instead, you start helping again. Small things. Fetching firewood, stirring the pot, folding cloths. Agnes sees you outside one day and mutters, "Didn't expect that one to keep living." You thank her anyway. As the weeks pass, signs of life return to the village. A child chases a dog through the square. Someone mends a fence. 2 people argue loudly about chickens. No one throws herbs anymore. No one scrubs the door frames with vinegar. The fear has slipped back beneath the surface for now. Your sister begins preparing. She sews. She cooks in batches. She rests in the afternoons, one hand on her belly, eyes half closed. You make her tea and don't ask too many questions. Agnes visits more often. She checks on the baby, though she never touches your sister's stomach. She listens. She asks questions about dreams, about appetite, about swelling. She watches your sister's hands. Hands tell more than bellies, she says. She leaves behind bundles of raspberry leaf and comfrey. When the time comes, boil these. You ask her quietly one evening what you should really expect. Agnes pauses. Then she says pain, noise, a lot of waiting, and then something so loud and alive it frightens you. You nod. She starts to leave but turns back. She'll need you. You nod again, but this time it sticks. One night your sister wakes you, her face pale, her jaw clenched. "It's starting," she whispers. And just like that, everything blurs. Water boils, blankets are folded, the hearth roars. Agnes arrives fast. She speaks little. She sets her tools out like a soldier before battle. And then It begins. Your sister screams, not from fear, from effort, from power, from a place deeper than language. You stay outside, mostly, but sometimes you fetch things. Sometimes you sit near the door and just listen. The noises are indescribable. Moaning, shouting, silence. Then more shouting. Time melts, the candle burns low. And then suddenly life. A wail, a small, shrill, furious cry that makes your knees buckle. Agnes opens the door, her face unreadable. She nods. It's a girl, she says. And your sister's still breathing. You laugh, or cry, or both. You don't remember. You just know you walk inside and you see her tiny, red-faced, bundled in cloth, and your sister sweaty, exhausted, smiling. In a world filled with rot and fever and plague carts, this moment is clean. For the first time in what feels like forever, something new has entered your life. And she is angry and warm and alive. 2 weeks pass. The baby whom your sister names Anselma after no one in particular, but everyone at once sleeps most of the day and screams most of the night. You don't mind, not really. Every time she wails, it's proof that life is still happening inside these walls. Your sister is healing slowly. She winces when she stands, holds her belly with one hand when she laughs and naps like it's a sacred ritual. But she's there. Present. You find yourself watching her more now, not out of worry, but wonder. There's something monumental about survival that doesn't fade with time. It only deepens. You begin doing more around the house. Carrying, chopping, stirring. You even fix a leak in the roof with nothing but a bent spoon and a prayer to whichever saint governs rafters. It's probably Saint Vincent. Or maybe Saint Hold It Together. You've come back to the living, but outside not everything has. The war has returned. Not war in the grand, glorious sense that bards sing about. Not banners and gleaming armor. No. This is the kind of war that leaks like mold into places it doesn't belong. Sickness carried by swords, infection riding in saddlebags. The soldiers are here again. Not many, just a few. A band of mercenaries probably unpaid for months passing through like wolves in patched armor. They don't fight, they don't need to. They look, and that's enough. One of them is wounded, not bleeding, infected. A festering mess of torn flesh and blackened skin. His leg smells like a midden pit. You see him from across the square slumped over a cart. His eyes are glassy, his comrades keep their distance. You already know he'll die, you can smell it. So can Agnes, who refuses to go near. That one's already gone, she mutters. Just waiting for the dirt. The others ask for food, a little wine. One asks your sister to smile at him. She doesn't. They stay for a night. One night. Long enough to remind you that swords aren't the only things that wound. The next day the sick man is gone. Buried, maybe, or left. No one asks. But his absence spreads a new unease. Because war doesn't just kill with blades. It leaves wounds that fester. Wounds no healer can touch. You remember a story Agnes told once about a soldier with an arrow in his thigh. The wound wasn't fatal, but no one cleaned it. Within days it swelled, turned purple, then black. His leg was amputated with a saw and 2 men holding him down. He died anyway. Of rot. That's the true horror, not the injury, the after. In your village, wounds mean infection. Infection means death. There are no antiseptics. No bandages that aren't reused. A rusty knife, a dirty rag, and hope that's surgery here. Your father died of a broken rib. Not the break itself, but the cough that followed. Your neighbor's boy stepped on a nail. The swelling reached his knee in 3 days. He stopped breathing on the 4th. Historians still argue whether the infections killed more than the weapons. You know the answer already. Even bruises are dangerous, a bad fall, a crushed finger. Anything that breaks the skin invites what you cannot see. There's one young man in the village, a blacksmith's apprentice, who burned his hand on a hot iron last summer. The blister turned gray. He lost 3 fingers. He still works. He doesn't complain, but he wraps his hand in cloth even when it's hot, like he's hiding a secret. When people go to war, they return missing pieces. And if they don't die from the wounds, they carry something else. A quietness, a weight. You've seen it in the way old men stare at fire too long, in the way they flinch at bells, in the way they sleep with knives near the pillow. Sometimes it isn't just the body that gets sick. You once met a soldier who refused to take off his boots even when his feet bled. Better to rot with armor on than be caught sleeping, he said. You never saw him again, and now your sister worries. Not just for Anselma, but for what world she's been born into. She wraps the baby tighter, lights candles she can't afford, refuses to let the child near open windows. You try to reassure her. You lie. You say this will pass. You say war doesn't stay in one place too long. You hope you're right. Still you prepare. You collect clean cloths. You boil herbs. You sharpen the dull knife and hide it under the floorboard, not as a weapon, but as a last resort. Agnes teaches you how to make a wound poultice. Honey moss, raw egg white. The honey kills what's inside, she says. The moss draws out the rot. You write it down on a scrap of parchment with a stick of charcoal. It feels important. She also shows you how to close a cut. With thread. With fire. You try not to flinch. She doesn't care. Later that night, you sit by the hearth holding Anselma in your arms. She stares at nothing. Her hands curl and uncurl like tiny ferns. She smells of smoke and milk and future. You whisper to her about wounds, about fevers, about survival. You tell her that the world is heavy, yes, but so are you, and you're still here. You promise her things you can't guarantee, but she listens anyway. The seasons change almost without your noticing. You wake one morning to birdsong, a real one, not the mournful caws of scavengers or the screech of barn owls. Just a single warbler, its voice soft and unsure, like even it is testing the air before trusting it. The worst has passed. The fever no longer clings to the village like smoke. No new carts, no fresh marks on doors. The herbs over thresholds have withered in place, forgotten. You see neighbors sweeping their doorsteps again, not to chase away spirits, but because the mud is thick and it's finally worth cleaning. And you're alive. You don't bounce back quickly. You still have days where your legs tremble from nothing, when your chest feels like wet straw. But you're eating, you're walking, you're even laughing now, and then softly, like someone afraid they'll scare the joy away. The village feels changed too. Thinner, quieter. The absences are loud. No one mentions the names of the ones who didn't make it. Not directly, they're present in the silences. In the bread recipe that turns out wrong because someone forgot to add the rosemary. In the stool at the hearth that nobody sits in. In the way Agnes stops mid-sentence sometimes, like she remembered someone she'd almost managed to forget. But life stubborn and ordinary returns anyway. People plant gardens again. Someone paints a shutter blue. The goats, blissfully unaware of any plague, continue their chaotic reign of the pastures. Even the church bells ring differently now, less like funeral gongs, more like a call back to rhythm. You return to your routines cautiously. You help fetch water from the well, watching it ripple, wondering how something so clear could ever carry so much grief. You tend the fire. You fold clean cloths. You even help your sister make a new batch of soap from leftover lard and ashes. She scrubs her hands so often now that her knuckles are raw. You don't blame her. Anselma is growing, fast. Her cries have become more purposeful. She has discovered her fingers and is deeply offended by their refusal to obey her. She sleeps tucked against your chest now, and when she wakes, you talk to her. You tell her about how the world is not always this peaceful. about how just weeks ago the streets whispered with illness, about the men who debated bile, the leeches, the laughter, the cart. She blinks at you. She gurgles. She spits up on your sleeve. That's fair. One evening you find yourself walking outside the village for the first time in months. The fields are greening again. Patches of wild garlic poke up between the rocks. A pair of deer flash between trees like secrets. You sit on a flat stone and listen to the wind. It feels cleaner somehow. Not pure, just less burdened. You recall distantly the moment you thought you were going to die. How your skin felt thin, your bones hollow. You remember your mother's voice low and steady and the smell of sage. You remember Agnes tying a red string around your wrist, the barber's blade, the prayers, the hot wine, the silence. You remember it all, not clearly. Fever memories blur at the edges like candle smoke. But the core remains. You were sick, terribly, and you survived. That's not nothing. The oddest part is realizing how little the world noticed. The sun still rose. The stars still wheeled overhead. Even the rats carried on like nothing had happened. Your story, the sweat and the blood and the waiting and the watching, all took place in a single room with a damp ceiling and an uneven floor. And yet here you are. You're not heroic. You didn't discover a cure. You didn't outsmart death with quick wit or clever tricks. You endured. You were cared for. You were lucky. You re-enter the village with a strange lightness. The kind that comes from surviving not through strength, but through sheer stubborn proximity to the people who refuse to give up on you. That night, the village gathers for a meal. Nothing grand, just soup, flatbread, and songs. A way of proving to each other that you're still here. The fire's warm. Someone plays a flute. Agnes drinks cider and mutters, "Too many people smiling. Must be spring." You catch your sister looking at you from across the fire. She doesn't speak, just smiles. A real one. Not wide, not forced, just honest. You eat, you laugh, you sing, you exist. You have never been more aware of your own body, of its aches, its endurance, its trembling joy. Later, as you walk home beneath a sky pricked with stars, you feel something rise in your chest. Not fear, not even hope. Just the quiet truth that you're part of something again. A world, a family, a future. And as Anselma coos in her sling and your sister hums an old lullaby, and the wind carries the scent of wood smoke and mint and promise you understand. You lived through a time when getting sick was a death sentence. And you didn't die. That's enough for tonight. You wake to the sound of birds again. Real birds, plural this time, chattering in the trees like they've just remembered spring exists. Sunlight leaks through the shutters in thin golden lines, dust dancing slowly in the beams. The air smells of wood ash, wild thyme, and bread baking somewhere not far away. You stretch. Carefully. The ache in your joints is now just stiffness. The soreness in your lungs now just memory. You feel like a house that's been mended, planks still rough but solid again. Your sister is humming while she stirs a pot over the hearth. Anselma lies swaddled in a basket, making gentle squeaks that sound like questions. You smile at both of them before your feet hit the floor. It's just another day. And that's the miracle. Outside the village moves like nothing happened. Except, of course, it did. And you can feel it in the way people speak just a little softer. The way they linger in doorways before saying goodbye. The way even Agnes, that unshakable wall of bark and vinegar, pauses now and then to hold a gaze a moment longer than necessary. You head to the well with your sister. The path is dry, the sky is clean. 2 dogs bark at a chicken and chase each other in the dust. You greet people as you pass. The baker's wife whose husband didn't make it. She nods a soft thing in her eyes that might one day be joy again. The blacksmith who wears his sadness like soot on his skin. The old man who never speaks, who has started tending herbs along the chapel wall. The world is scarred, but not broken. You draw water, you carry it home, you drink it with no fear. Later, you help build a pen for Anselma's eventual goat. Your sister insists every child should grow up with a goat. You agree. Goats are stubborn and ridiculous and hard to kill just like you. Agnes visits in the afternoon. She pretends to scowl at the baby. The baby sneezes on her. Agnes wipes her sleeve and declares her sturdy. This is the highest praise she gives. She leaves behind more dried herbs, a new recipe for a lung tonic, and a surprisingly gentle squeeze of your shoulder. You watch her walk away and wonder how old she truly is. 70, 90, forever. As the sun lowers, casting long, slanted light across your floor, you sit with Anselma in your lap. She grabs your nose and frowns like it personally offended her. You talk to her about everything. You tell her about the barber surgeon and his cheerful bloodletting, about Agnes and her charms and garlic, about star charts and beak masks soup made of turnips rats that weren't to blame, and leeches named Marcus. You tell her about people who tried doctors' wives, women midwives, strangers with wagons full of lies and licorice-flavored tonics. You tell her about breath, how precious it becomes when it's nearly gone. You tell her about how close everything came to ending. And then you tell her about what didn't. The pot on the hearth bubbles gently. The windows glow orange with evening. Your sister sings a little under her breath as she sews, rocking her foot back and forth. You think for the first time in months of the future. Not some grand shining thing, not castles or cures. Just tomorrow, a morning, a meal, a child who will teeth on everything and cry for no reason. That's enough. You lie in bed that night and pull the blanket higher over your chest. The ceiling above you is the same. The beams, the soot, the draft from the west corner still there. You breathe in. You breathe out. And you whisper a quiet, ridiculous promise to yourself. Next time you get sick, maybe don't let anyone put a dead mole in your tea. Then you smile because even that joke feels like medicine now. You close your eyes. And this time, you sleep without dreaming. And now the fire is low. Its glow flickers gently on the walls like the last thoughts fading before sleep. The room you've imagined yourself in rough-hewn beams, warm wool, and the distant hoot of an owl settles into stillness. You've made it through the coughs, the bleeding, the bad smells, and the worse advice. Through leeches and vinegar-soaked rags, through chanting monks and muttering midwives, through cold nights and the silence of empty rooms. You've met plague carts and poultices, held tiny fingers, and carried water through a world just trying to stay upright. You've survived, dear one, and even if just in story that survival means something. Because sometimes the quiet act of carrying on, of boiling broth, of folding cloths, of whispering lullabies while the world outside rages is the bravest, kindest thing a person can do. So let the story fade gently behind your eyes. Let the baby's breath slow in her basket. Let the field beyond the village sway in a wind that smells of pine and something just a little like hope. Let Agnes rest her old bones by the fire. Let the barber put down his knife. Let the birds sleep on branches that no longer fear the absence of spring. You're safe now. Here in this small, quiet corner of imagined history, everything is still. Everything is soft. And as the last ember winks into darkness and the last word curls into hush, I'll be here with another story for you tomorrow night.